In this video, we're going to show you our process behind making 37 fly boxes. So you can see initially we had raw wood that was done on a chainsaw mill with quite a few challenges. There were cracks in the wood from drying, as well as quite a bit of worm damage. And we had to work around some of these things. We also had to repair some of these things in order to use the wood. I used an already flat board with a stopper on it so that I could flatten the pieces initially, since they were wider than our jointer. This worked out really well and allowed us to just do everything on the planer in this initial phase. Here's a look at resawing the material. Most of it was 2 to 3 inches thick, and we needed the tops and bottoms of the fly boxes to be more like 1 inch thick. After the resawing, everything needed to be planed down to the same thickness, and so that is what you're seeing here. Next was cutting the boards to their final width on the table saw. I did this in a way where I took off as much as possible of the unusable material. You can see here at the end a lot of worm damage, and we tried to avoid that. Then it was on over to the miter saw, where I set up with a board and a clamp a stopper. This allowed me to make a bunch of repeatable cuts to the final length that I needed. After some initial repair work, it was time to router out the space on the top and bottom of each segment. That was 74 total pieces that needed a ½ inch removed, and this was a pretty lengthy process. This was multiple days of router work. I made the jig that I used with the router to allow a ½ inch on all sides, and you can see the whole jig there. After finishing on one router, I moved over to the other router to round over all of the edges on, again, all of the 74 pieces, and you can see my lovely dust collection set up there. You can see here that I'm rubbing peanut butter in all of the holes. Just kidding. That's epoxy. We put epoxy in all of the holes and worm damage and rotten spaces to stabilize the wood. It does look a little bit like peanut butter. As soon as that epoxy solidified, everything got run on the belt sander. This was the initial sanding. After that sanding came a bunch more sanding with the orbital sander. I went through 4 grits of sandpaper to get them nice and smooth so they would be ready for oil. I used a 10mm brad point bit so that I could center the holes exactly where I needed them to be. The magnets were then glued in place with a quick dry super glue. The hinges were also ordered in a 10mm size, so I used a tape stopper on the drill bit and drilled the holes for those to be precisely as deep and wide as I needed them to be. And coming up on the end of the project, we finally got to oil the boxes. These hardwood ones came out really nice once the oil went on. Once the oil had soaked into the boxes, we also did a coat of wax on each one. This is just for added protection. Last but not least, we installed a foam pad into the bottom of each box. And here's a final look at all the boxes laid out in the original pieces that they came from. We thought this was a cool way to look at them. We really hope you've enjoyed this video, and we thank you all for taking the time to watch and for all your continued support.